Now I have already shown you everything you need to know about arpeggios. In this lick you see there are lots of arpeggios both going up and down. And basically this is all you need to know about chords and arpeggios going up and going down. When you listen to one of the greatest, Charlie Parker, his arpeggio runs are 50% of his solos and are also just arpeggios up and down. In this jazz example where Michael Brecker is playing Recorder May, the amount of arpeggios are a little bit less because of all the scales he's playing, but they add up to the same thing, up and down. I want to go through how to understand arpeggios, how to practice arpeggios, and how to compose jazz lines using arpeggios, and how to add the extras, chromatics, enclosures and hip rhythm. Let's get started by understanding arpeggios. You probably know that all chords are built out of the scale. You start by building the triads by stacking thirds in the scale. And we will get much more into the triads later in this video. They're really hip for making jazz lines. But we want to be able to play the seventh chords. So let's take a step further. When you add another third interval to the triad, you get the seventh chords. And when we have the seventh chord, we can start our solo journey. Just taking a look back at the Charlie Parker solo on Confirmation, you see that every time he's using an arpeggio, it's just up and down, no extra stuff. And you see in these licks I made earlier, it's only arpeggios up and down. There's almost no change in the arpeggio structure, only in the direction. And from this I'll conclude that the most important arpeggio exercise is just up and down. Playing the chords, the arpeggios in the scale ascending and the chords in the scale descending. Just practicing these two arpeggio exercises gives you so many possibilities when making solo lines. And I'm going to say this a lot in this video. Practice the two arpeggio exercises up and down and add it immediately into your playing. Start composing jazz lines. In this rather simple 2-5-1 I'm using the arpeggio up and the arpeggio down, the D minor and the G7. Just start by taking one arpeggio, move it up, fill in a bit of scale and then move the other arpeggio down and end the line. This is how you start. For every line you make, find out what arpeggio exercise fits the best. Is it going up or is it going down? And in this line it's quite obvious I'm using the arpeggios moving down. In this lesson on chords and arpeggios there's a lot of exercise and lots of licks. When you want to study this I really recommend you to go to my Patreon and download the lesson manual. There I've added all licks and all exercises in all 12 keys. The link is in the description. In this lick you see that on the C major chord I make a variation. I play an E minor chord. I'll just explain what the E minor chord on that C major chord is. When you have that C major 7 chord and you staple one more third interval on top of that, you get a C major 9 chord. And if you're playing that C major chord without the C, you get an E minor chord. And this arpeggio we have already practiced in our arpeggio exercise in the scale. Playing that E minor chord on the C major, you actually get the sound of the C major chord without the root. Using the higher tones in the chord takes you playing away from the basic sound when you're adding the root to the chords. When you use the chords without the root, they're called upper structures. You can use the upper structures on all chords. When I use these upper structures, I basically see them as extensions on the chord themselves. I'm not thinking E minor over C major, I'm thinking C major 9. And then I'm starting from the third of the C major chord. Let's try this new sound, the upper structures, and make some jazz lines. So it's very clear that you get a much more refined sound when you're not using the roots of the chords. The sound is much less heavy. Make sure that when you're training the arpeggios and the upper structure arpeggios, you do this together. This makes the sound of the two become one thing in your mind. By the way, playing this exercise is amazing for learning the upper structures in the scales and the chords. I'm going to say, try working the exercise out and immediately add it into your jazz lines, like this. On this D minor chord, you see that I'm adding an E in front of that F major upper structure. This is a chromatic approach note to the arpeggio. Adding a chromatic approach note to the arpeggios gives you so many extra possibilities. I love these exercises, so of course we're going to make a little exercise like this. And to get the line to pop a little bit more, I have added a triplet rhythm in there to get you going on extra rhythms. Every time you add an exercise into your practice routine, you should make sure that you make lines out of the material you're practicing. And you can see as soon as I train that triplet arpeggio, it adds even more rhythm into this line. So we know we can play the chords ascending, but it's so important that you take the descending chords very seriously and practice these too. I want to show that everything you can do ascending, you can do descending too. Add the same principles, the chromatic approach note in front of the descending chord. You also see that I added two chord names on top, one of the full chord and one of the upper structure chord. The line starts looking more and more complicated. But the truth is, when you're practicing a few focused lines on only arpeggios up and down, you can get so many different jazz lines from so little material. And I said I'm going to mention this a lot, add the material into your playing right away. Let's add this chromatic descending arpeggio into our playing. We start with building the seventh chords out of the triad, but further we skip the triads totally. Now I'm coming back to it because the triad is super hip to make jazz lines of. When using triads in jazz lines, the jazz lines come so much more compact because the triad doesn't have so much range. And one magic thing with the triad is that it's very often used as enclosures. And the triad as enclosures sounds super hip. Try out this exercise to train the triads as enclosures. And as always, when you have played an exercise, add it into your playing immediately. All these exercises and all the licks are written into the lesson manual in all 12 keys. It's such an easy step up to getting this material under your fingers. It's a super easy download on Patreon, the link is in the description. When you're working on these arpeggios, you must check out the scales too. This video is one of my top 10 videos on how to incorporate scales into your playing. Watch it right now. Play music, have fun.